The Blackwater gang thought they were the kings of Redemption Valley. They'd built their criminal enterprise through intimidation and bloodshed, leaving a trail of misery across 5 counties. But on a moonlit autumn night, they made a fatal miscalculation that would become whispered legend in the criminal underworld for generations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. They took Eleanor Wells hostage. They saw what they wanted to see, a 48-year-old widow living alone on a valuable piece of land, an easy target to force the sale of her strategic property. What they failed to recognize was the calculated precision behind her quiet gaze, the same precision that had once made her the most effective operative in a classified government program known only as Nightshade. The woman who'd neutralized 18 high-priority targets across 3 continents without ever leaving evidence. The operative that foreign intelligence agencies codenamed the Widow long before her husband's death made it literally true. Now, bound to a chair in their remote hideout, surrounded by the territory's most dangerous outlaws, Eleanor Wells is exactly where she planned to be. Because sometimes vengeance requires patience. Sometimes justice demands infiltration. And the Blackwater gang is about to learn why, even years later, hardened operatives still speak her codename in hushed tones. The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of Redemption Valley as Eleanor Wells completed her property inspection with methodical efficiency. Her movements were deliberate and economical, boots leaving evenly spaced impressions in the dew-covered grass. To any observer, she appeared to be an ordinary widow tending to her modest ranch, just another hard-working soul starting her day. But Eleanor never stopped observing her surroundings. She spotted the glint of metal through the distant tree line. The 3rd time this week she'd noticed the same vehicle making a calculated pass along her property's boundary. Different men, same dusty black truck with the distinctive dent in the rear quarter panel. Blackwater gang. They were growing bolder. Inside her farmhouse, the coffee had already percolated, its rich aroma filling the kitchen. Eleanor poured herself a cup, her movements fluid and deliberate as she gazed out the window toward the road. The calendar on her wall showed the date, October 17th, 2023, circled in red. Today marked exactly 1 year since Michael's murder. She touched the simple gold wedding band she still wore, allowing herself 5 seconds of remembered grief before compartmentalizing the emotion away. The Blackwater gang had given her exactly 52 weeks to mourn. Now it was time for other matters. The burner phone in her drawer buzzed once. Eleanor checked the message, deleted it, and returned the device to its hiding place. Everything was proceeding according to the timeline. She moved to the living room, where a modest bookshelf held family photos, her cover identity meticulously cultivated over 5 years in Redemption Valley. Eleanor and Michael Wells, the quiet couple who'd moved from back east to start a small horse ranch, no children, few friends. Nothing remarkable, but behind that carefully constructed facade lay something else entirely. Eleanor reached behind the bookshelf, pressing a concealed mechanism that caused a hidden compartment to slide open. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, filled with handwritten notes, maps of the region, and surveillance photos taken over months of careful observation. The Blackwater gang's properties, movements, and operations were documented with professional precision. Faces, names, schedules, all catalogued with the methodical care of someone who'd spent decades in intelligence work. She reviewed her notes one final time. Mason Blackwater, the gang's leader, had expanded their territory aggressively in the past 18 months. What had started as a small-time operation dealing in stolen goods had evolved into something more organized: weapons trafficking, protection rackets, and land acquisition along the county's main transportation routes. Eleanor's property was the final piece they needed to complete their control of the valley's eastern access road, the most direct route between the interstate and the Canadian border, with minimal surveillance and ideal terrain for moving illicit cargo. Michael had discovered their operation accidentally, stumbling upon a midnight weapons transfer while checking on a sick horse in their far pasture. 2 days later, he was dead. A tragic accident, according to Sheriff Grimes. His truck, found at the bottom of Sawyer's Ravine with him inside, but Eleanor had recognized the signature immediately. The brake lines cut in precisely the same manner she herself had once been trained to do, making the failure appear like natural wear to anyone but the most trained observer. The familiar calm settled over her as she reached deeper into the hidden compartment, removing a false panel to reveal what lay beneath: a custom-modified Sig Sauer P226, 3 passports with different identities, a satellite phone, and a small metal case containing specialized tools of her former trade. She checked the weapon with practiced efficiency, then returned everything to its hiding place. A vehicle approached on the gravel driveway, the distinctive sound of tires crunching stone triggering her awareness. Eleanor closed the hidden compartment and moved to the kitchen, assuming the role she'd perfected, the grieving widow, vulnerable and alone. Sheriff Grimes's patrol car came to a stop by her front porch. He was right on schedule, exactly as her intelligence had predicted. The pattern recognition that had kept her alive during 15 years of covert operations had become her most valuable tool in planning what would come next. Eleanor watched through the kitchen window as Grimes adjusted his belt and hat, the practiced movements of a man who'd spent 20 years in law enforcement. What most people didn't know was that for the last 5 of those years, a significant portion of his income had come from Mason Blackwater. "Morning, Eleanor," Grimes called as she opened the front door, his tone carefully calibrated to project official concern. "Thought I'd stop by, check how you're holding up today. Been a year now, hasn't it?" "That's thoughtful of you, Sheriff," Eleanor replied, her voice carrying just the right amount of lingering grief. "Coffee's fresh if you'd like some." She led him into the kitchen, noting how his eyes scanned the room. Not for threats, but for valuables, for signs of her financial situation. Eleanor poured him coffee in a chipped mug, playing her part flawlessly. "I know today must be difficult," Grimes said, settling his substantial frame into a chair that creaked under his weight. "Michael was well liked around here." "Yes, he was," she replied softly, allowing a calculated pause. "It's been a challenging year." Grimes sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim of his mug. "Been meaning to talk to you about something, Eleanor. There's been some interest in your property. Might be a good time to consider selling given the circumstances." And there it was, right on cue. "Selling?" Eleanor allowed her voice to waver slightly. "This was our dream, Sheriff. Michael and I put everything we had into this place." "I understand that." Grimes nodded with manufactured sympathy. "But a woman alone out here, it's a lot to manage. The Blackwater Development Group has made a generous offer. They're looking to expand tourism in the valley, create jobs. Progress is coming whether we like it or not." Eleanor noted his use of "we," the practiced inclusivity of someone attempting to manipulate. She'd heard better from North Korean interrogators. "Development Group?" she questioned, injecting confusion into her tone. "Mason Blackwater," Grimes clarified. "Local businessman, built himself up from nothing. Got vision for the region." Eleanor allowed herself a small frown. "I've heard stories about the Blackwaters. Not all of them are flattering." A flash of annoyance crossed Grimes's face before he masked it. "People talk, Eleanor. Successful men always have detractors. Mason's offering 300,000, well above market value." Eleanor rose to refill their coffee cups, using the movement to conceal her expression. 300,000 for property worth at least $1 million, given its strategic location. Michael had understood the land's true value. which is why he'd insisted on purchasing it years ago when they were establishing their cover. "I appreciate the information, Sheriff," she said, returning to the table, "but I'm not ready to make any decisions yet. This place, it's all I have left of Michael." Grimes's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The offer won't stay open indefinitely. Eleanor, might be best to think about your future. Is that a suggestion, Sheriff?" She allowed a trace of steel to enter her voice. "Or a warning?" He blinked, recalibrating. She'd pushed just enough to test his reaction. Just friendly advice from someone who cares about the welfare of everyone in this country. These hills can get mighty dangerous for folks on their own. The threat was clear, if predictably cloaked in concern. Eleanor nodded, returning to her role of intimidated widow. "I'll give it some thought." Grimes finished his coffee and stood. "You do that? Mason's a reasonable man, but business is business. He'll be in touch directly, I expect." After seeing the sheriff out, Eleanor watched his patrol car disappear down her driveway. She allowed herself the smallest of smiles. First phase was successful. The official channels had been exhausted. Now the Blackwater gang would move to direct intimidation, just as her analysis had predicted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She returned to her hidden compartment, retrieving a small electronic device. Moving methodically through the house, she activated the surveillance equipment she'd installed months ago, miniature cameras and microphones in strategic locations, including the barn and perimeter of the property. Then she checked each of the specialized defensive measures she'd prepared, ensuring everything was operational. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley as Eleanor moved to the back porch, gazing out at the landscape that had been her home for 5 years. It had taken time to adjust to the quiet life after decades of covert operations, the stillness, the routine, the simple rhythms of rural existence. Michael had embraced it fully, finding peace in the distance they'd put between themselves and their former lives. She'd tried for his sake, and for a while it worked, until the Blackwater gang murdered her husband. Eleanor touched her wedding ring again, remembering their last conversation. Michael had known the risk of reporting what he'd seen to Sheriff Grimes. "We left that life behind, Ellie," he'd said. "We have to do things the right way now." His conscience had cost him his life, and it had awakened something in Eleanor that had lain dormant for years. A dust cloud approached from the main road, 3 vehicles moving with purpose toward her property. Right on schedule, the Blackwater gang was nothing if not predictable in their escalation patterns. Eleanor moved inside, checking the small earpiece that would allow her to monitor the property's surveillance system. Then she positioned herself in the kitchen, appearing to be simply preparing dinner as 3 black SUVs pulled into her driveway. 8 men emerged, led by Mason Blackwater himself, tall, broad-shouldered, with the easy confidence of someone used to getting his way through intimidation. Eleanor recognized his top lieutenants from her surveillance, brothers Caleb and Joshua Porter, ex-military with dishonorable discharges, Ray Dawson, former enforcer for a Nevada crime family, and 4 younger recruits, eager to prove themselves. They approached her front door with practiced formation. Eleanor counted the visible weapons, at least 5 handguns, possibly more concealed. Predictable. The heavy knock came as she was drying her hands on a kitchen towel. "Mrs. Wells," Mason's deep voice carried through the door. "Mason Blackwater, I believe Sheriff Grimes mentioned I'd be stopping by." Eleanor took a measured breath, stepping fully into her role. She opened the door with slight hesitation, making herself appear smaller against Mason's imposing frame. "Mr. Blackwater," she acknowledged. "The sheriff did mention something about development plans." Mason smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "May we come in to discuss the opportunity? I promise we won't take much of your time." Eleanor noted how the men had already positioned themselves to prevent escape. 2 at the back of the house, others maintaining visual on approach routes. Professional, if somewhat obvious. "I suppose that would be all right," she said, allowing a nervous tremor in her voice. Mason entered first, followed by the Porter brothers. The others remained outside, establishing a perimeter. Eleanor led them to her living room, offering coffee that Mason politely declined. "Mrs. Wells," Mason began, his tone businesslike but cordial, "I'll be direct. Your property is the final piece in a significant regional development project. I'm prepared to offer you $300,000 cash, no questions asked, for immediate sale." Eleanor sat with her hands folded in her lap, the picture of a woman out of her depth. "That's very generous, Mr. Blackwater, but this ranch means a great deal to me. My husband and I—" "Your husband is gone, Mrs. Wells," Mason interrupted, his voice hardening slightly. "And maintaining a property like this alone isn't just difficult, it can be dangerous." She allowed her eyes to widen slightly at the implied threat. "What my associate means," Caleb Porter interjected with practiced smoothness, "is that rural properties require significant upkeep and security. Accidents happen, equipment malfunctions, intruders looking for easy targets." "Like what happened to Michael?" Eleanor asked quietly, watching their reactions. A momentary tension filled the room. Mason's expression flickered before settling back into practiced neutrality. "Your husband's accident was a tragedy," he said carefully. "One that highlights the dangers of isolation. Our offer provides you the means to relocate somewhere safer, perhaps closer to family." Eleanor rose and moved to the window, using the moment to scan the positions of the men outside. Everything proceeded exactly as anticipated. "I have no family, Mr. Blackwater," she said, injecting vulnerability into her voice. "And limited options. Even with your generous offer, starting over at my age wouldn't be easy." Mason exchanged glances with his men, scenting weakness. He stood, approaching Eleanor with what he clearly believed was reassuring confidence. "Mrs. Wells, Eleanor, I understand your position. Perhaps we could discuss employment opportunities within our organization as part of the arrangement. Administrative support, perhaps? We take care of our own in this valley." Eleanor turned, allowing tears to well in her eyes. The perfect image of a desperate widow considering surrendering to intimidation. "Could I have a few days to consider your offer?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "This is all so sudden." Mason's expression hardened. "I'm afraid time is a luxury we don't have. Construction schedules, permit timelines, business considerations, you understand. We need your answer today." Eleanor wrung her hands, the very picture of distress. I just don't know if I can decide something this important so quickly." Caleb Porter moved closer, his patience visibly thinning. "Mrs. Wells, I don't think you understand the situation. This isn't really a negotiation." "What my brother means," Joshua added, his tone deceptively gentle, "is that we've already begun the development process. Contractors are scheduled, materials ordered. Delays would be problematic." Eleanor backed away slightly, playing her role to perfection. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Porter?" "Of course not," Mason interjected smoothly, "but reality is reality. Your property will be developed. The only question is whether you benefit from the arrangement or find yourself facing unfortunate circumstances." Through the window, Eleanor noticed 2 more vehicles approaching, right on time. Black sedans with tinted windows. Not local. The next phase was beginning. "I think I need you to leave now," she said, allowing her voice to shake with what they would interpret as fear. Mason sighed, nodding to the Porter brothers. "I had hoped we could resolve this amicably. Perhaps you need a more persuasive demonstration of our commitment to this project." As if on cue, Ray Dawson entered from the kitchen, where he'd slipped in through the back door. "Boss, we've got company coming up the drive. 2 cars look professional." Mason frowned, moving to the window. "Federal plates. Who did you contact?" "Mrs. Wells." Eleanor backed toward the fireplace, where a concealed panic button was installed beneath the mantel. Not that she needed it. Everything was proceeding according to her meticulous plan. "I haven't contacted anyone," she insisted, the tremor in her voice now genuine seeming. "I don't understand what's happening." Mason turned to his men, his expression hardening. "Change of plans. Mrs. Wells is coming with us until we sort this out. Caleb, secure her. Ray, tell the others to prepare for visitors." Eleanor allowed Caleb to grab her arm roughly, suppressing her instinct to counter the move with the 3 different techniques that would have left him incapacitated. Now was not the time. She needed to be inside their operation, and this was the most efficient route. "Please," she begged as Caleb zip-tied her hands, "don't do this. I'll sign whatever you want." "Too late for that," Mason said coldly. "You've complicated things, Mrs. Wells. Now we do this the hard way." Through the window, Eleanor could see the black sedans stopping at the end of her driveway. 4 men in suits emerging with professional caution. "Out the back," Mason ordered. "Joshua, create a diversion if needed." As they hustled her through the kitchen toward the rear door, Eleanor allowed herself to be manhandled, maintaining the appearance of terrified compliance. The earpiece hidden in her auditory canal vibrated once, confirmation from her surveillance system that everything was being recorded. Outside, they moved quickly to the SUVs. Eleanor was forced into the middle vehicle, sandwiched between Caleb and another gang member. Mason took the front passenger seat, issuing rapid orders through a handheld radio. As they pulled away, using a hidden access road through the northern section of her property, Eleanor caught a glimpse of the men in suits approaching her house. Right on schedule. Martin Hayes and his team from the Shadow Operations Division, the remnants of the Nightshade program she'd once been part of. Not here to rescue her, but to monitor and provide backup, only if absolutely necessary, because this was her operation now, her plan, her justice. As the vehicles bounced along the rough back road, Eleanor allowed herself to be jostled about, maintaining the appearance of a terrified hostage. Inside, however, a familiar calm had settled over her. The operational clarity she'd relied on during her years as the widow. The Blackwater gang had just made their first critical mistake. They thought they were taking a hostage to pressure her into selling her land. In reality, Eleanor Wells had just infiltrated their organization exactly as she'd planned, precisely 1 year to the day after they'd murdered her husband. Phase 1, complete. The convoy of black SUVs moved deeper into Blackwater territory, leaving the main roads behind as they climbed into the densely forested hills that formed the natural boundary between Redemption Valley and the neighboring county. Eleanor memorized each turn, each landmark, building a mental map as the vehicles wound through terrain few outsiders ever witnessed. Mason Blackwater sat rigidly in the front passenger seat, his broad shoulders tense as he issued clipped orders through his radio. Eleanor observed his movements with clinical detachment, noting the military precision in his communication style. 3-word commands, specific call signs, structured response protocols. Not the undisciplined criminal she'd expected when starting her investigation. This was someone with formal tactical training. After 30 minutes of driving, the vehicles slowed at an unmarked access road blocked by a heavy gate. 2 armed guards emerged from a concealed position, checking each vehicle before allowing them to pass. Eleanor counted 4 surveillance cameras hidden among the trees, covering all approach angles. Professional security setup. Welcome to Blackwater. "Lodge, Mrs. Wells," Mason said without turning around. "You'll be our guest until certain matters are resolved." The lodge revealed itself as they created a final hill, a sprawling compound centered around what had once been a luxury hunting Retreat. The main building was a massive timber and stone structure surrounded by several outbuildings and a large barn converted for other purposes. A reinforced perimeter fence enclosed the entire complex, with guard towers positioned at strategic intervals. Impressive. Operation, Eleanor remarked, breaking her fearful silence with calculated timing. Mason glanced back, eyes narrowing at her unexpected comment. Just a family business, Mrs. Wells. A family business with military-grade security, she observed, allowing a hint of her analytical mind to show through her frightened widow facade. A deliberate choice, plant seeds of uncertainty about who exactly they had captured. The vehicle stopped before the main building. As Caleb roughly pulled her from the SUV, Eleanor took inventory of her surroundings. 23 visible personnel, multiple weapon types, communications equipment suggesting a coordinated security system. This was no ordinary criminal hideout. It was a paramilitary base. Mason led the way into the lodge, where the rustic exterior gave way to surprisingly sophisticated interior spaces. The great room had been converted into an operations center, with computer stations, communication equipment, and a large tactical table displaying detailed maps of the region. 3 people looked up as they entered. A young woman with copper hair and cold eyes, late 20s, moved with the controlled awareness of someone with specialized training. A middle-aged man with a professor's bearing but a soldier's posture. And an older man seated in a leather chair beside a roaring fireplace, his resemblance to Mason unmistakable despite the oxygen tubes in his nostrils and the weathered quality of his skin. "What's this?" the older man demanded, his voice stronger than his frail appearance suggested. "Complication, Dad," Mason replied. "Mrs. Wells from the Eastern property. We had federal visitors and needed to expedite negotiations." The older man's gaze locked onto Eleanor, assessing her with the calculating scrutiny of someone who'd spent a lifetime evaluating threats. Eleanor returned his stare, allowing a flicker of defiance to show through her fear. "Mrs. Wells," the older man said, his voice a graveled rumble. "I'm Jackson Blackwater. Forgive the unusual circumstances of our meeting." Eleanor recognized the name immediately from her intelligence gathering. Jackson Blackwater, former Special Forces, rumored connections to classified operations in South America during the 1980s, founder of the organization that bore his name. Official records listed him as deceased, killed in a helicopter accident 15 years ago. "You're supposed to be dead," she said, the words escaping as if driven by shock rather than calculation. A thin smile crossed Jackson's face. "The government finds it convenient when certain operators are officially removed from the board. I imagine you understand bureaucratic efficiency, Mrs. Wells." The statement carried weight, a probing comment designed to test a theory. Eleanor maintained her fearful demeanor while noting this significant development. Jackson Blackwater suspected something about her background. "I don't understand any of this," she insisted. "I'm just a widow trying to keep my ranch running." Jackson studied her for an uncomfortable moment before turning to his son. "Take Mrs. Wells to the East Wing guest room. Ensure she's comfortable but secure. We'll continue this conversation when our other situation is resolved." As Caleb led her away, Eleanor heard Jackson ask Mason quietly, "Has Hayes made contact yet?" The mention of Martin Hayes, her former handler in the Nightshade program, sent a pulse of adrenaline through Eleanor's system. The complication was more significant than she'd anticipated. If Jackson Blackwater knew Hayes by name, the connection between the Blackwater operation and government intelligence was deeper than her initial intelligence had suggested. Caleb escorted her through a long hallway lined with wildlife trophies and vintage weapons displayed in glass cases. They climbed a wide staircase to the second floor, where he unlocked a door and ushered her inside. "Home, sweet home," he said with a smirk. Don't get any ideas about leaving. This whole place is wired tight. The guest room was comfortably furnished, but had clearly been modified for security purposes. Reinforced door, window bars disguised as decorative ironwork, surveillance camera discreetly mounted in a corner. A gilded cage. Caleb cut the zip ties, binding her wrists, then backed toward the door. Bathrooms through there. Someone will bring food later. Make yourself comfortable, Mrs. Wells. You might be here for a while. After he left, Eleanor heard the distinctive sound of a heavy-duty lock engaging. She waited 30 seconds, then methodically began exploring her confinement. The surveillance camera's field of vision left small blind spots near the bathroom and beside the bed. The window, despite its reinforcement, had exploitable weaknesses in the frame mounting. She wasn't planning to escape. Not yet. Being inside, the Blackwater compound gave her unprecedented access to intelligence she could never have gathered otherwise. But understanding all available options was operational protocol. Eleanor removed her boots and examined the concealed compartment in the heel of the left one, the small ceramic blade still secure. Then she checked her watch, which contained both a GPS tracker and a communication device keyed to frequencies Hayes and his team would be monitoring. She sat on the edge of the bed, facing away from the camera, and began mentally cataloging what she'd learned in just the first hour of her captivity. First, Jackson Blackwater was alive, a significant deviation from official records. Second, the organization had far greater resources and sophistication than local law enforcement reports had indicated. Third, they appeared to have some connection to government intelligence operations, possibly through the same shadows Eleanor herself had once operated within. And fourth, they were expecting contact from Hayes, which suggested they had informants within official channels, perhaps even within what remained of the Nightshade program itself. Eleanor allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. Her operation was already yielding valuable intelligence beyond what she'd anticipated. Now she needed to understand the extent of the Blackwater operation, identify all key personnel, and document their activities before executing the next phase of her plan. A sound at the door interrupted her thoughts. The copper-haired woman she'd seen downstairs entered, carrying a tray with food and a bottle of water. "Dinner," she said curtly, placing the tray on a small table. "Jackson wants to make sure you're treated well." Eleanor maintained her role as the frightened widow. "Please, I don't understand what's happening. Why am I here?" The woman assessed Eleanor with cold efficiency. "You know exactly why you're here, Mrs. Wells. Your property sits on the most viable transport corridor in the Eastern Valley. Business is business." "It's just a small horse ranch," Eleanor protested, injecting desperation into her voice. "A small horse ranch with remarkably sophisticated surveillance equipment," the woman replied, watching Eleanor's reaction carefully. "Our tech team is quite impressed with your security system. Not exactly standard for a grieving widow, is it?" Eleanor allowed genuine-seeming surprise to cross her face. "My husband installed those cameras after we had some equipment stolen last year. I barely know how to operate them." The woman's expression remained skeptical. "I'm Vanessa Blackwater, Mason's sister. Unlike my brother and father, I don't believe in unnecessary conversation." She moved toward the door, then paused. "One piece of advice, Mrs. Wells. Whatever game you're playing, reconsider. People who complicate Blackwater business tend to disappear permanently." After Vanessa left, Eleanor examined the food, simple but well prepared. Roast chicken, vegetables, fresh bread. She ate methodically, maintaining her strength while contemplating this new information. Vanessa Blackwater was clearly the family skeptic, someone who saw beneath surfaces. A potential problem, but also potentially useful. As darkness fell, Eleanor observed increased activity through her window. Vehicles arriving, personnel moving with purpose between buildings. Something significant was happening. She positioned herself to catch fragments of radio communication from the guards outside, mentions of shipment, schedule change, and border crossing. The Blackwater operation was accelerating its timeline, exactly as her analysis had predicted. When she'd chosen today's date to implement her plan, shortly after midnight, heavy footsteps approached her door. The lock disengaged, and Mason Blackwater entered, followed by the professional-looking man she'd seen earlier. "Mrs. Wells," Mason said, his tone businesslike. "This is Dr. Alan Mercer, our organization's security specialist. He has some questions about your background." Mercer placed a laptop on the table, his movements precise and economical. "Nothing invasive, Mrs. Wells. Just trying to understand some inconsistencies in your history." Eleanor recognized the interrogation technique immediately. Start with the implication of already having damaging information. Watch for defensive reactions. She taught the same approach to intelligence recruits. "My history?" she asked, allowing her voice to waver. "I don't understand." Mercer opened the laptop, turning the screen to show her a standard background check document. Eleanor Wells, born Eleanor Ann Bishop in Springfield, Illinois, nursing degree from University of Michigan, met Michael Wells while working at Chicago Memorial Hospital. Married 8 years ago, moved to Redemption Valley 5 years ago, no children, no close family, no social media presence, very tidy, very contained. Eleanor maintained her confused expression. "That's my life. What inconsistencies?" Mercer smiled thinly. "The inconsistency, Mrs. Wells, is that it's too perfect. No loose ends, no complications, no unexplained gaps. Real lives are messy. Yours reads like a cover identity, a dangerous moment." Eleanor calculated her response carefully, allowing genuine tears to well in her eyes. "After Michael died, Sheriff Grimes investigated us. Said Michael's accident seemed convenient. Questioned everything about our lives like we were criminals. Now you're doing the same thing when all I want is to be left alone with what's left of the life we built." Mercer watched her reaction with clinical detachment. "Perhaps we've been monitoring unusual federal interest in our region. Your property has had multiple visits from government vehicles in recent months. The Bureau of Land Management has an easement through the north section," Eleanor explained. "The response prepared long in advance. They're conducting a water table survey." "The BLM doesn't drive unmarked sedans with federal plates," Mason interjected, "and they don't employ Martin Hayes." The direct reference to Hayes changed the dynamic. Eleanor allowed genuine-seeming shock to register on her face. "I don't know anyone named Martin Hayes." Mercer studied her reaction. "Interesting. Because he seems very interested in you, Mrs. Wells. Or should I call you by another name? Your identity before Eleanor Bishop." Perhaps a critical juncture. Eleanor made a calculated decision to show a controlled break in her facade. Not enough to reveal her true nature, but sufficient to suggest there was indeed something to discover. "I don't know what you're talking about," she insisted, but aloud. A slight shift in her posture, more defensive, less frightened. Mason and Mercer exchanged glances. "You should know," Mason said carefully, "that we have resources beyond what you might expect, federal connections that provide us certain information. We know when official documentation has been modified." Eleanor allowed her expression to harden slightly. "Are you suggesting I'm not who I say I am?" "We're suggesting," Mercer replied, "that Eleanor Bishop's history prior to 15 years ago is remarkably sparse, almost as if the identity was created rather than born." Eleanor rose from her seat, letting genuine anger fuel her performance. "My husband is dead. Your men kidnapped me from my home. Now you're accusing me of... what exactly? Being someone other than who I've always been. To what end?" Mason stepped closer, his intimidating presence filling the room. to the end of understanding why a woman with your particular profile purchased the exact property that happens to be crucial to our transportation network. Why federal agents with intelligence community connections are monitoring your ranch. Why does your surveillance system rival military-grade installations? Eleanor recognized the moment to plant seeds of doubt. Not about her innocence, but about her relationship to the very authorities the Blackwaters seemed concerned about. "You think I'm working with the government?" she asked, incredulous. "After what they did to Michael, a calculated slip, one that both men caught immediately." "What did the government do to your husband, Mrs. Wells?" Mercer asked quietly. Eleanor turned away, as if realizing she'd said too much. "Nothing, it's not. I shouldn't have said anything." "Mrs. Wells," Mason pressed, "if you have information about federal operations in this region, sharing it could significantly improve your situation." Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, the perfect image of someone wrestling with a difficult decision. "I can't. They're everywhere. Michael found out something he wasn't supposed to know. He was going to report it to Sheriff Grimes, but I begged him not to. Then the accident happened." Mercer leaned forward. "What did Michael discover?" "I don't know exactly," Eleanor whispered. "Something about government vehicles using the old logging roads after midnight. Unmarked trucks, armed men. He took photos, but they weren't on his phone when the sheriff returned his belongings after the accident." The two men exchanged significant glances. Eleanor had just offered them exactly what their existing suspicions wanted to hear. Confirmation of covert government operations in their territory, unrelated to her. The suggestion that her husband's death might have been connected to such operations provided a plausible explanation for her sophisticated security measures. "Why didn't you report this?" Mason asked. Eleanor gave a bitter laugh. "To whom?" "The same sheriff who spent more time questioning our backgrounds than investigating Michael's death. The federal authorities who might have been involved. I just wanted to be left alone, to keep the only thing I had left of our life together." Mercer closed his laptop. "Your situation is complicated, Mrs. Wells, but potentially salvageable. If what you're suggesting is accurate, we may have common interests." "Common interests?" Eleanor scoffed. "You kidnapped me." "A regrettable necessity," Mason replied, "but perhaps an opportunity. My family has significant resources and, let's call it, an adversarial relationship with certain government agencies. If your husband was eliminated for what he discovered about federal operations in this valley, we could help you find the truth, even justice." The irony was almost too perfect. The Blackwaters were offering to help her achieve the very vengeance she'd spent a year meticulously planning against them. "Why would you help me?" she asked suspiciously. "Because information about covert federal activities in our territory is invaluable," Mason answered honestly. "And because despite what you may have heard, the Blackwater family takes care of its own. This valley is our home. We protect what's ours." Eleanor allowed her expression to show cautious consideration. "What would you want from me?" "For now, cooperation," Mason said. "We need to resolve some pressing business matters over the next 48 hours. After that, we can discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement regarding your property and what, you know." "And if I refuse?" Mason's expression hardened. "Then things become considerably less comfortable, Mrs. Wells. We're offering an olive branch here, despite the unusual circumstances." Eleanor nodded slowly, as if reluctantly accepting her situation. "I don't have much choice, do I?" "We all have choices," Mercer observed. "Some are simply better than others." After they left, Eleanor returned to the window, watching the continued activity in the compound. The night had yielded far more intelligence than anticipated. The Blackwaters weren't simply rural criminals. They were running a sophisticated operation with apparent connections to and conflicts with federal intelligence agencies. More importantly, they now viewed her as potentially valuable rather than merely an obstacle. She had successfully planted the first seeds of her infiltration strategy, positioning herself as a potential ally against a common enemy. Eleanor checked her watch. The GPS tracker would be transmitting her location to Hayes and his team, not for extraction, but for monitoring only. This was her operation, conducted on her terms, under her timeline. Outside, more vehicles arrived at the compound, heavy trucks with reinforced cargo sections. Eleanor observed the careful security protocols as each vehicle was inspected before. Being directed to the converted barn, the Blackwater operation was accelerating its timetable just as her intelligence analysis had predicted. Something significant was being prepared, likely the weapons shipment she'd tracked through months of careful surveillance. Eleanor smiled faintly in the darkness. Phase 2 was proceeding perfectly. She was inside the Blackwater compound, establishing her position, gathering critical intelligence, and they still had no idea who they had really captured or what fate was methodically unfolding for them, one calculated step at a time. Dawn broke over the Blackwater compound, spilling golden light across the forested mountains. Eleanor had slept exactly 4 hours, a disciplined sleep cycle developed during years of fieldwork when rest was necessary, but vulnerability was unacceptable. She completed a series of subtle stretching exercises to maintain flexibility, moving in the camera's blind spots. The compound had remained active throughout the night. Through her window, Eleanor had tracked personnel shifts, vehicle movements, and security protocols. By sunrise, she'd documented the patrol patterns of the guards and identified at least 3 separate security systems protecting the perimeter. A knock at the door preceded Vanessa Blackwater's entrance. She carried another tray of food: eggs, toast, coffee, and a bundle of clothing. "My father would like to speak with you," she said without preamble. "These should fit." She placed the clothes on the bed: jeans, a flannel shirt, boots. Practical attire that would allow ease of movement. Eleanor noted the choice with professional interest. They weren't dressing her as a prisoner, but as someone who might need mobility. "Am I being released?" Eleanor asked, injecting cautious hope into her voice. Vanessa's expression remained unreadable. "You're being reassigned. Your cooperation yesterday has opened certain possibilities." Eleanor took the clothing, maintaining her role as the gradually adapting captive. "What does your father want with me?" "That's his business to explain." Vanessa moved toward the door, then paused. "One thing, Mrs. Wells, my brother may be willing to believe your convenient story about government persecution, but I'm not so easily convinced. I've run background on dozens of federal witnesses and informants. They all have that same perfect, frictionless history, just like yours." Eleanor allowed a flash of genuine wariness to show through her facade, creating measured cracks in her. Performance would make it more believable. No one maintained perfect composure under pressure. "I'm just a widow trying to protect what's mine," she insisted. "We'll see." Vanessa's gaze was coldly analytical. "You have 15 minutes. Don't make my father wait." After Vanessa left, Eleanor changed clothes quickly, noting that the boots, while similar to standard work footwear, had been subtly modified for durability and traction, the kind of practical adaptation someone with tactical experience would make. Another small insight into the Blackwater operation's professional standards. She ate methodically, using the time to organize her observations and prepare for this critical interaction with Jackson Blackwater. First impressions were often tactical, opportunities, especially with someone who possessed his apparent background. Precisely 15 minutes later, Vanessa returned with 2 armed guards. They escorted Eleanor downstairs and across the main lodge to a wood-paneled study where Jackson Blackwater sat behind an imposing desk. Unlike the previous evening, he wasn't using oxygen, suggesting his frail appearance might be partially theatrical. "Mrs. Wells," Jackson gestured to the chair across from him. "Thank you for joining me. Please, sit." The room was a calculated display of power and history, walls lined with books on military strategy and regional development, display cases containing vintage weapons and artifacts, maps of the valley showing property boundaries and natural resources. Everything positioned to convey authority, legitimacy, and deep territorial connections. "Not like I had much choice," Eleanor replied, allowing a hint of defiance to color her compliance. She took the offered seat, mentally documenting escape, routes, potential weapons and camera positions, operational habits impossible to fully suppress. Jackson nodded to Vanessa and the guards. "Leave us," Vanessa frowned. "Dad, I'll be fine." Jackson cut her off with the ease of someone accustomed to unquestioned authority. After they reluctantly departed, he focused his full attention on Eleanor. "Do you know what the most valuable skill in intelligence work is, Mrs. Wells?" he asked conversationally. Eleanor maintained her wary expression while calculating her response. Jackson was testing her, looking for reactions that would confirm his suspicions about her background. "I wouldn't know anything about intelligence." "Work," she replied carefully. Jackson smiled thinly. "The most valuable skill isn't marksmanship or technological proficiency or even tradecraft. It's pattern recognition." He opened a folder on his desk. "People who've operated in certain environments develop distinctive patterns, ways of moving, observing, responding to threats. These patterns become instinctual, nearly impossible to fully conceal." Eleanor allowed herself to shift uncomfortably. "I don't understand what this has to do with me. From the moment you arrived at this compound, you've exhibited multiple recognition patterns consistent with specialized training." Jackson leaned forward. "You catalogued exits upon entering rooms. You tracked guard rotations through your window. You positioned yourself to maintain optimal visibility while minimizing exposure. Unconscious habits that tell a very interesting story. A critical moment." Eleanor decided to adjust her approach, not abandoning her cover, but allowing Jackson to believe his insights were producing results. "Your son kidnapped me from my home at gunpoint," she said with deliberate intensity. "Of course I'm looking for exits and tracking guards. Anyone would under these circumstances." "Not with your precision," Jackson countered. "Not with your specific methodology. Most hostages exhibit panic patterns, erratic observation, emotional responses, physical stress markers. You demonstrate controlled assessment, systematic evaluation. Professional habits." Eleanor fell silent, as if caught in an uncomfortable truth. "I'm not interested in extracting a confession, Mrs. Wells," Jackson continued. "Your background is your business. What concerns me is understanding your current objectives and affiliations." He turned one of the maps toward her, a detailed topographical rendering of Redemption Valley with property boundaries clearly marked. Eleanor's ranch was highlighted in red. "5 years ago, you and your husband purchased this specific property." Jackson traced the boundaries with his finger. "Not the larger Wright estate to the south, which was also for sale. Not the Henderson parcel to the north, which had better water rights. This exact property, which happens to control the only viable mountain pass between the interstate and the Canadian border crossing at Solitude Point." Eleanor maintained her silence, watching him build his case. "At the time, my family was just beginning to expand our transportation interests in the region," Jackson continued. "Very few people understood the strategic value of that mountain impasse, yet somehow you and your husband, a nurse and an agricultural engineer from Chicago with no previous connection to this area, identified and acquired precisely the property that would eventually become crucial to regional development." "We bought it because it was beautiful," Eleanor replied. "The realtor said no one wanted it because the access road needed work." We got it for a fair price." Jackson's expression showed he wasn't convinced. "And then you spent 5 years establishing yourselves as model citizens, unremarkable, helpful neighbors, until your husband had his unfortunate accident." Eleanor allowed genuine grief to surface. "Michael was murdered. We both know that." "Yes," Jackson agreed, surprising her with his directness. "The question is by whom and why." He stood, moving to a sideboard, where he poured 2 glasses of water. "My son believes your husband discovered something about government operations in this region and was eliminated as a result. A convenient narrative that aligns with our own experiences with federal interference." Eleanor accepted the water when offered. "You don't believe that?" "What I believe," Jackson said, returning to his seat, "is that coincidences are rare in my line of work. When someone with apparent specialized training purchases strategically valuable property, maintains a low profile for years, then experiences a targeted elimination of their partner followed by federal surveillance, I consider other possibilities." Eleanor took a sip of water, using the moment to compose her response. Such as the possibility that you and your husband were placed here as long-term assets monitoring our operation, that his death was not the result of his discoveries, but perhaps an internal dispute among your handlers, or a burned cover, or any number of scenarios that would explain federal interest in your property that predates his death. A dangerous accusation that required careful navigation. Eleanor set her glass down deliberately. "You think I'm some kind of government agent?" she asked, her tone carefully balanced between incredulity and indignation. "I think," Jackson replied, smoothly, "that you are someone with training similar to my own, whose purpose in Redemption Valley remains unclear. Whether that makes you an adversary or a potential ally depends on your current affiliations and objectives." Eleanor leaned forward. "My objective is simple: justice for my husband." "A powerful motivator," Jackson acknowledged. "One I understand intimately." He opened a drawer and removed a photograph, sliding it across the desk. The image showed a younger Jackson in military uniform, standing beside a woman and teenage boy, clearly Mason. "My wife, Rebecca," Jackson explained. "She was killed during a federal raid on one of our properties 15 years ago. The official report called it collateral damage, unavoidable casualty. The reality was an overzealous FBI tactical team with poor intelligence and worse discipline." Eleanor studied the photo, recognizing the calculated vulnerability in sharing this personal history. Jackson was establishing common ground: shared loss, government responsibility, motivation for operating outside traditional systems. "I'm sorry about your wife," she said quietly. "I rebuilt everything after her death," Jackson continued, "created an organization capable of operating beyond government reach, established infrastructure, supply chains, security protocols, all to ensure what happened to Rebecca would never happen to another member of my family." He reclaimed the photograph, returning it carefully to the drawer. "Which brings us to our current situation. You possess property we need. You have skills that suggest specialized background, and you have apparent reason to distrust the same federal agencies that have targeted my family for years." "What exactly are you suggesting?" Eleanor asked. "A mutually beneficial arrangement," Jackson replied. "You want justice for your husband. I want to complete our transportation network without federal interference. Perhaps our objectives are compatible." Eleanor allowed cautious interest to show in her expression. "And if they're not, then your stay with us becomes considerably less comfortable," Jackson said matter-of-factly. "I respect your apparent capabilities, Mrs. Wells, but I've spent decades outmaneuvering federal operators far more experienced than yourself." The implicit threat hung in the air between them. Eleanor recognized the moment to advance her infiltration strategy. "What would this arrangement involve?" she asked. Jackson smiled slightly, sensing her shift toward engagement. Initially, information exchange. You tell us what you know about federal monitoring of this region. In return, we share what we've learned about unusual activity around the time of your husband's death. And my property remains yours, with access agreements that meet our transportation needs. Eleanor pretended to consider the offer. How do I know I can trust you? Your son kidnapped me at gunpoint. You don't, Jackson acknowledged. But consider your alternatives carefully. If you are who I suspect you might be, you understand pragmatism. And if you're simply a widow seeking justice, this represents your best opportunity to access resources beyond what's normally available to civilians. A calculated risk. Eleanor allowed her expression to harden slightly. I want something more concrete than vague promises of information sharing. Jackson raised an eyebrow. Such as, I want to know exactly what your son's men were doing on my property the night before Michael's accident. Why were they so interested in our northern boundary line? Her specific question landed with visible impact. Jackson's practiced composure flickered momentarily. Interesting. What makes you think my son's men were on your property that night? Motion sensors on the north fence line, Eleanor replied, revealing information she'd carefully withheld until this tactical moment. Michael installed them after we lost some livestock to predators. They captured images of 3 men checking our property markers at 2:17 a.m. Men wearing the same distinct patches I've seen on your security personnel. The fabricated evidence was a calculated gamble, impossible to verify now that Michael and his supposed security footage were gone, but specific enough to suggest genuine knowledge. Jackson studied her with renewed interest. You've been holding valuable cards, Mrs. Wells. Self-preservation, she replied simply. Information is only useful when properly leveraged. This response, deliberately reflecting intelligence trade philosophy, caused Jackson to lean back, reassessing her with professional appreciation. Indeed, he agreed. Perhaps we've been underestimating each other. He pressed an intercom button on his desk. Mason, join us in my study. While they waited, Jackson maintained steady eye contact with Eleanor. Whatever your true background, Mrs. Wells, you've demonstrated admirable composure under pressure, a quality I respect. Necessity teaches adaptability, Eleanor replied, deliberately using a phrase common in intelligence circles. Jackson's subtle reaction confirmed he recognized the reference. The dynamic between them had shifted, no longer simply captor and hostage, but 2 professionals engaged in a complex negotiation where neither fully revealed their true position. Mason entered, his expression shifting from concern to curiosity. As he observed the unexpectedly civil atmosphere, Mrs. Wells and I have been discussing a potential arrangement, Jackson informed him. She has information about federal movements in our territory and specific questions about activities near her property before her husband's death. Mason glanced between them, clearly surprised by this development. What kind of arrangement? A provisional alliance, Jackson replied. Against common adversaries, Mason frowned. We don't know enough about her background or affiliations. Which is why the arrangement begins with information exchange only, Jackson explained patiently. Mrs. Wells will join you during today's inspection tour. Show her the transportation network. Explain our development plans for the Eastern Valley. In return, she'll share what she knows about federal surveillance of her property. That's a significant security risk, Mason objected. A calculated one, Jackson countered. Sometimes, the best way to assess someone's true position is to observe their reactions to privileged information. Eleanor recognized the strategy immediately. They would show her selected operations, watching how she processed and responded to what she witnessed. Her background knowledge, tactical awareness, and specific questions would reveal far more about her true nature than any direct interrogation. I'll cooperate, Eleanor said, addressing Mason directly. Your father's right. We may have common interests, particularly if federal agencies were involved in Michael's death. Mason's skepticism remained evident, but he deferred to his father's authority. The inspection begins in 30 minutes. Northern route first, then the main facility. Perfect, Jackson said with finality. Vanessa will provide Mrs. Wells with appropriate gear. Consider her a consultant for now. Restricted access protocols, but not a prisoner. After Mason left, visibly uncomfortable with the new arrangement, Jackson turned back to Eleanor. Understand this clearly, Mrs. Wells. This provisional trust can be revoked instantly at the first sign of deception. My family's security remains my highest priority. As for finding the truth about Michael's death is mine, Eleanor replied with deliberate intensity. Jackson nodded, satisfied with the established parameters. One last question before you join Mason. How familiar are you with the operational history of Nightshade protocols? The direct reference to her former program sent a pulse of adrenaline through Eleanor's system, though her expression revealed nothing. The question confirmed what she'd begun to suspect. Jackson Blackwater had connections to her former world, connections deep enough to know program code names that most intelligence officers would never encounter. I've never heard that term, she answered carefully. Jackson's slight smile suggested he expected that response. Of course. Vanessa will meet you in the main hall. Good luck with your consultation, Mrs. Wells. As Eleanor was escorted from the study, she processed this significant development. Jackson Blackwater hadn't just been any special forces operator. He had knowledge of classified programs, including Nightshade. The operation had just become considerably more complex than her initial intelligence had suggested. In the main hall, Vanessa waited with a tactical jacket and communications equipment. Standard procedure for field consultants, she explained, her tone making it clear she considered the term a poor euphemism. The jacket has a tracking chip. Remove it and security. Protocols activate immediately. Eleanor accepted the gear, noting the quality of the equipment, another indication of the Blackwater organization's resources. Your father seems to think we might have aligned interests, she commented, testing Vanessa's position. My father sees potential assets everywhere, Vanessa replied coldly. I see security risks. Don't mistake provisional access for trust, Mrs. Wells. Eleanor zipped the jacket, appreciating Vanessa's direct approach. In many ways, the younger woman reminded her of herself at that age. Sharp, disciplined, instinctively, suspicious of unexpected developments. I understand operational caution, Eleanor replied, but sometimes unlikely alliances yield the best intelligence. Vanessa's eyes narrowed at Eleanor's choice of terminology. Just remember that we're watching. Every word, every reaction, every micro-expression will be analyzed. One false step, and your consultant status reverts to something far less comfortable. Eleanor nodded, acknowledging the warning. Understood. Mason appeared at the lodge entrance, accompanied by Caleb Porter and another security team member Eleanor hadn't previously encountered. Older, with the weathered features and vigilant posture of a veteran operator. Ready to see how real rural development works, Mrs. Wells? Mason asked, his tone indicating the tour would be as much evaluation as education. Lead the way, Eleanor replied, falling into step beside him as they exited the lodge. The morning sun illuminated the full scale of the Blackwater compound as they crossed toward a line of waiting vehicles. Eleanor took advantage of the opportunity to document additional details, guard positions, communications equipment, weapons capabilities. Every observation added to her understanding of the operation she had infiltrated. As they reached the vehicles, Eleanor felt Mason's scrutiny intensify. One thing before we begin, he said quietly. Whatever game you're playing, whatever your true purpose here, remember that this is my family's territory. We've dealt with federal agents, private contractors, and corporate infiltrators before. None of them posed a lasting threat to our operation. Eleanor met his gaze directly. I'm not your enemy, Mr. Blackwater. Not unless you were responsible for my husband's death. We'll see where the evidence leads, Mason replied, opening the vehicle door for her. Just understand that in these mountains, the Blackwater family is judge, jury, and when necessary, executioner. We protect what's ours. Eleanor entered the vehicle, maintaining her outwardly compliant demeanor while inwardly advancing her strategic assessment. The initial confrontation phase had transitioned into something more complex, a provisional alliance built on mutual suspicion and carefully calculated revelations. Phase 3 was now in motion. She had successfully maneuvered from hostage to consultant, gaining sanctioned access to Blackwater operations while positioning herself as potentially valuable rather than merely expendable. As the vehicles pulled away from the lodge, Eleanor prepared for the next critical stage in her infiltration, direct observation of the criminal enterprise she had spent a year preparing to dismantle. The operation that had killed her husband and would soon face the carefully orchestrated retribution she had designed. The widow was hunting from within, exactly as planned. The convoy wound through the densely forested mountains, taking unmarked roads that didn't appear on any official maps. Eleanor memorized each turn, each landmark, constructing a mental topography of Blackwater territory. The inspection tour was clearly designed both to showcase the operation's scale and to evaluate her responses to what she witnessed. Mason sat beside her in the lead vehicle, while Caleb Porter drove and the veteran operator, introduced only as Hawkins, maintained a vigilant watch from the passenger seat. First stop is our northern distribution hub, Mason explained, his tone businesslike. You'll understand why your property's strategic position matters to our development plans. Eleanor noted his use of euphemisms, distribution hub, rather, than smuggling station, development plans instead of criminal enterprise. The Blackwaters maintained a corporate facade over their illegal operations, a linguistic discipline that suggested sophisticated organization. The convoy emerged from the forest into a large clearing where an unremarkable warehouse stood surrounded by loading docks and a small airstrip. Personnel moved with purpose between vehicles and buildings, the operation running with military precision. Impressive facility, Eleanor commented as they parked. Seems excessive for rural development. Mason studied her reaction. The official business is timber processing and regional goods distribution. The unofficial business is more specialized. Smuggling, Eleanor said directly, testing his response to straightforward terminology. Surprisingly, Mason smiled. We prefer alternative importation, but yes, essentially. This facility processes approximately 20 million in merchandise monthly, moving south to distribution points across 5 states. The candor was calculated, revealing enough to gauge her reaction while evaluating whether she had prior knowledge of their operation. Eleanor maintained professional interest without surprise. What kind of merchandise? Various products with excessive taxation or regulatory burden, Mason replied smoothly. Primarily tobacco and spirits, with some pharmaceutical products. Nothing particularly destructive. We don't deal in narcotics or human trafficking. Another calculated revelation, positioning the Blackwater operation as criminal, but with supposed ethical boundaries. Eleanor filed this characterization away, knowing from her year of intelligence gathering that their actual operations included weapons, counterfeit goods, and protected wildlife products. As they exited the vehicle, Eleanor spotted a woman directing operations on the loading dock, mid-30s, athletic build, with the confident posture of someone comfortable with authority. She noticed their arrival immediately, handing off a tablet to an assistant before approaching. "Unexpected visitors, Mason," she called, her tone indicating disapproval of the breach in security protocols. "Special circumstances, Diane." Mason replied. Mrs. Wells is consulting on our Eastern Valley development. Dad's authorization. Diane looked Eleanor over with the calculating assessment of a seasoned operator, then extended her hand. Diane Hawkins, Northern Operations Coordinator. Eleanor noted the shared surname with the veteran security officer, making the connection. Eleanor Wells, the property owner from Cedar Ridge, Diane said, recognition flashing in her eyes. Interesting promotion from problem to consultant. Eleanor maintained calm eye contact. Circumstances evolve. Diane's slight nod acknowledged the professional response. Indeed, they do. Well, since you're here with clearance, I might as well show you the actual operation rather than the sanitized tour. Mason frowned. Diane, if we're vetting her, let's do it properly. Diane cut him off with the confidence of someone with sufficient authority to challenge even a Blackwater. See how she responds to the unfiltered version. This unexpected development offered Eleanor a greater intelligence-gathering opportunity than she'd anticipated. I'd appreciate straightforward information, she said. If we're exploring mutual interests, transparency serves everyone. Diane smiled slightly. Follow me, Mrs. Wells. As they walked toward the main warehouse, Eleanor observed the subtle dynamic between Mason and Diane, a professional respect tinged with competitive tension. Another piece of the organizational structure falling into place. The warehouse interior revealed the true scale of the Blackwater operation. Worker teams processed incoming shipments with assembly line efficiency, repackaging goods, changing labels, and preparing loads for distribution. The operation employed at least 50 people at this facility alone. We maintain employment for over 300 families across the valley, Diane explained, leading them through the facility. For most, we're the only reliable income source. Since the mines closed and timber operations downsized, building community support through economic dependence, Eleanor observed. Diane gave her an appraising look. Precisely. When your paycheck feeds your family, you develop certain loyalties. When those paychecks are better than anything else available, those loyalties become unshakable. They approached a secure area where workers processed what appeared to be prescription medications, transferring them from industrial packaging to consumer-ready bottles. Pharmaceutical division, Diane explained. Same medications people need but can't afford through official channels. We provide at 60%. Below retail, still maintain healthy margins. And create customers who depend on you for their health, Eleanor noted. Brilliant strategy. Mason studied her reactions carefully. You don't seem particularly shocked by any of this, Mrs. Wells. Eleanor met his gaze directly. I spent 5 years living in this valley, Mr. Blackwater. People talk. I may have lived quietly, but I wasn't oblivious to who actually runs things around here. This calculated response served multiple purposes, explaining her lack of surprise while establishing that she had potentially gathered local intelligence during her years in Redemption Valley. Diane led them to a small office overlooking the warehouse floor. A tall, lean man with silver-streaked hair looked up from a computer terminal as they entered. His sharp features and alert posture reminded Eleanor of intelligence analysts she'd worked with, the kind who could process vast amounts of data and identify critical patterns. Thomas, Diane addressed him, this is Eleanor Wells from Cedar Ridge. She's consulting on the Eastern Valley project. Thomas removed his reading glasses, studying Eleanor with immediate intensity. The widow whose husband had the unfortunate accident last year. Interesting timing on your consultancy. Eleanor recognized the deliberate probe. Sometimes tragedy opens unexpected doors. Indeed. Thomas extended his hand. Thomas Reed, Information Systems and Analysis, the Blackwater Intelligence Officer. Eleanor realized. His handshake was firm, his gaze evaluative. This was someone who would have run background checks, analyzed surveillance, and potentially flagged inconsistencies in her cover identity. Mrs. Wells has been given provisional access by Jackson, Mason explained. She may have useful information regarding federal activities in the eastern sector. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Based on what evidence? Her property has been under surveillance, Mason replied, and she's indicated knowledge of unusual activities around the time of her husband's death. Thomas turned to his computer, typing rapidly. Your husband died on October 17th last year. Single vehicle accident on Route 23 near Sawyer's Ravine. Sheriff Grimes investigated, ruled it accidental due to brake failure. Eleanor allowed her expression to harden. You seem well informed about my husband's death, Mr. Reed. I maintain. Comprehensive records of all significant events in our territory, Thomas replied, unapologetically, especially those with potential security implications. A critical opening. Eleanor stepped closer to his monitor. What kind of security implications did my husband's death have for your operation? Thomas glanced at Mason, who nodded permission to continue. Your husband's accident occurred 3 days after we detected unauthorized surveillance equipment on Forest Service land adjoining your property, Thomas explained, pulling up a map on his screen. Specifically, here, here, and here. He indicated 3 locations along the boundary. Of Eleanor's ranch, what kind of surveillance equipment? Eleanor asked, injecting genuine-seeming surprise into her voice. Cellular transmission repeaters disguised as trail markers, Thomas replied. Military grade, designed to intercept communications across specific frequency ranges. The same ranges our security systems utilize. This was new information, details Eleanor hadn't uncovered in her own investigation, potentially valuable intelligence about a third party interested in Blackwater operations. You think Michael discovered these devices? She asked. Unknown, Thomas answered, but the timing is suggestive. We detected the equipment on October 14th. Your husband died on the 17th. In between, our security logs show unusual activity along your northern property line. Eleanor processed this information against her existing intelligence. You think whoever planted those devices killed Michael? It's one possibility we've considered, Thomas acknowledged. Though your arrival at the Blackwater compound has introduced new variables into my analysis, Eleanor met his suspicious gaze directly. I had nothing to do with my husband's death, Mr. Reed. Perhaps not knowingly, Thomas replied, but your background profile contains anomalies that merit further investigation, Mason interrupted, clearly uncomfortable with Thomas's direct approach. That's enough for now. We should continue to the eastern facility. As they left Thomas's office, Eleanor filed away this crucial interaction. The Blackwater organization had their own intelligence officer who had identified inconsistencies in her cover, a potential threat to her operation, but also a source of valuable information. Returning to the vehicles, Eleanor found herself assigned to ride with Diane Hawkins rather than Mason, a deliberate separation to observe her interactions with different organizational figures. As they drove toward the eastern facility, Diane maintained professional silence for several minutes before speaking. You've made quite an impression, she observed. 2 days ago you were a problem to eliminate. Now you're touring our operation with provisional access. People are often more complex than initial assessments suggest, Eleanor replied carefully. Diane smiled slightly. And some people deliberately present simplified facades to conceal that complexity. The remark hit uncomfortably close to Eleanor's actual strategy. You seem skeptical of my rapid change in status. Let's say I've seen Jackson's provisional allies come and go over the years, Diane replied. Some proved valuable, others proved problematic and were dealt with accordingly. And which category did you fall into? Eleanor asked, recognizing Diane hadn't always been part of the organization. Diane gave her an appraising look. Perceptive. I was an external talent recruited for specific expertise. Former military intelligence with specialization in secure logistics. When my unit was disbanded after budget cuts, the Blackwaters offered better compensation and more interesting work than the private sector alternatives. This calculated personal revelation served as both warning and invitation, showing Eleanor that the Blackwaters recruited professional talent while suggesting they might view her as potential recruitment material rather than merely a temporary asset. How many others came from similar backgrounds? Eleanor asked. Enough to maintain professional standards, Diane answered carefully. This isn't some backwoods criminal enterprise, Mrs. Wells. It's a sophisticated organization with military-grade security, intelligence capabilities, and operational discipline. I'm beginning to understand that, Eleanor replied truthfully. They drove in silence for several minutes before Diane spoke again. Your husband, was he also former military or intelligence? Another probing question, testing whether Michael shared Eleanor's suspected background. Agricultural engineering, Eleanor answered. University research followed by private sector consulting. He designed irrigation systems for drought-resistant farming. An unusual partner for someone with your observational habits, Diane noted. Eleanor allowed a genuine smile. Opposites attract. He saw the best in people and systems. I tend to look for vulnerabilities and threats. A pragmatic division of perspective, Diane acknowledged. His death must have been disruptive to your equilibrium. The careful phrasing suggested Diane understood loss from professional experience. Eleanor decided to establish a tentative common ground. When you've had a partner watching your blind spots for years, operating alone requires significant adjustment, she replied. Diane nodded, the simple gesture conveying understanding without unnecessary sentiment. We're approaching the Eastern Facility. Technical Division. You'll meet Garrett Wilson, our engineering specialist. He's unconventional but brilliant. The convoy turned onto a gravel road leading to what appeared to be an abandoned lumber mill. The dilapidated exterior concealed sophisticated security measures that Eleanor's trained eye immediately identified. Motion sensors disguised as broken fixtures, cameras hidden in rusted equipment, thermal imaging disguised as damaged windows. Inside, the contrast was striking. The facility housed state-of-the-art technical equipment, computer systems, and what appeared to be a small manufacturing operation. Workers in clean room gear assembled electronic components at specialized stations. A lanky man with unkempt hair and intense eyes approached as they entered. His movement patterns suggested military training, subsequently overwritten by years of civilian technical work, disciplined core with relaxed extremities. Unexpected visitors, he noted, his tone indicating the same disapproval of protocol breaches that Diane had expressed. Garrett, Mason greeted him. This is Eleanor Wells. She's consulting on the Eastern Valley Project. Garrett's sharp eyes assessed Eleanor with clinical detachment. Cedar Ridge property owner, suspicious husband death, federal interest, nightshade protocol flags. The abbreviated speech pattern combined with the direct reference to nightshade sent a pulse of adrenaline through Eleanor's system. Garrett wasn't just noting her identity, he was referencing specific intelligence markers, including her former program. You've been researching me, she observed calmly. Standard procedure. Garrett replied unapologetically. Unknown variables require assessment. Mason frowned. Nightshade protocols? Thomas mentioned anomalies, not specific program flags. Different analysis parameters, Garrett answered, his attention remaining fixed on Eleanor. Communication patterns, movement signatures, property security measures, match indicators for specialized training profiles. Eleanor maintained her composed exterior while processing this significant threat to her cover. The Blackwaters had a technical specialist capable of identifying operational signatures associated with nightshade protocols, far more specific than general intelligence background. "I'm not familiar with whatever program you're referencing," she said carefully. Garrett's expression showed he expected that response. Few acknowledge classification levels above their clearance, pragmatic operational security. Before Mason could press further, a young woman approached from the technical area. Her confident stride and direct eye contact marked her as someone comfortable with authority despite her youth, mid-20s, with practical clothing and the calloused hands of someone who worked regularly with tools. "We need approval on the frequency adjustments for tomorrow's shipment," she addressed Garrett, then noticed the visitors. Her expression closed immediately, professional caution replacing operational focus. "Lily," Mason said warmly. "Meet Eleanor Wells. She's consulting on Eastern Development. Mrs. Wells, this is Lily Hawkins." "Another Hawkins," Eleanor noted. "Family connections running throughout the organization." "My daughter," Diane explained, noting Eleanor's recognition of the name. "Our technical specialist for communications and electronic countermeasures." Lily's handshake was firm, her assessment direct. "The widow from Cedar Ridge. Interesting development." The repeated identification of Eleanor by her cover status and property location revealed how thoroughly the Blackwater organization had mapped key assets and potential threats in their territory. Every significant figure in the region would have been similarly categorized and monitored. "Mrs. Wells may have information about federal surveillance in the eastern sector," Mason explained. "We're exploring mutual interests." Lily's skepticism was evident. Convenient timing, considering tomorrow's operation. "Operational security, Lily," Diane cautioned. "If she's getting your access, she's getting vetted for potential involvement," Lily countered, with the directness of someone raised within an organization rather than recruited to it. No point in half measures. Eleanor recognized an opportunity to demonstrate value and gather intelligence simultaneously. "If federal surveillance is targeting your eastern operations, I might have relevant information. My property security system has documented unusual activity over the past 3 months." This calculated revelation caught everyone's attention. Mason stepped closer. "What kind of unusual activity?" "Unmarked vehicles using the Forest Service road that runs parallel to my northern boundary," Eleanor replied. "Always between 2 and 4 a.m., always on Tuesdays and Fridays, consistent enough to establish a pattern." The specificity of her information, fabricated but plausible, created immediate interest. Eleanor watched their reactions, noting who seemed most concerned by this intelligence. Garrett turned to a nearby computer terminal, typing rapidly. "Tuesday-Friday pattern matches suspected federal monitoring schedule, consistent with communication intercepts from last month." Mason exchanged significant looks with Diane. "Why didn't you report this to Sheriff Grimes?" Eleanor allowed bitterness to color her response. "The same sheriff who spent more time questioning my background than investigating my husband's death? I decided to handle my own security." "Smart woman," Lily commented, her initial skepticism softening slightly. "What kind of security system are you running?" "Motion-activated cameras with satellite uplink," Eleanor replied, describing a system sophisticated enough to be impressive, but not so advanced as to raise further suspicions about her background. "Michael installed it after we had equipment. Stolen. I maintained it after his death." "We should see this footage," Mason decided. "If it corroborates our own intelligence, it could be valuable for adjusting tomorrow's transportation schedule." Eleanor had anticipated this request. "The footage is secured in cloud storage. I can access it remotely if you provide internet." "Access?" Garrett shook his head immediately. "External network access denied. Security protocols prohibit unknown devices connecting to facility systems." "Then we return to my property," Eleanor suggested. "I can retrieve the footage and provide."
"Copies."
Mason considered this option, clearly weighing security risks against potential intelligence value that would require taking you outside the compound. Not ideal at this stage. Alternative solution, Garrett interjected. Describe technical specifications of your system. We replicate access protocols on isolated terminals, minimal security exposure. The proposal presented both opportunity and risk for Eleanor. Providing technical details might further expose her background, but refusing would undermine the trust she was attempting to build. I can work with that approach, she agreed, calculating that the intelligence value outweighed the risk. Lily stepped forward. I'll handle the technical interface. It'll give us a chance to compare notes on security systems. Her tone suggested professional interest, mixed with continued evaluation. As they moved toward a separate technical area, Eleanor noted a subtle shift in how the Blackwater personnel viewed her, still suspicious, but with growing interest in her potential value to their operation. She had successfully positioned herself as someone with useful information and compatible interests, rather than merely a problem to eliminate. The secondary figures within the organization were proving as important to understand as the Blackwater family itself. Diane and Hawkins, with their military background, Thomas and his intelligence analysis, Garrett with his technical expertise and concerning knowledge of Nightshade protocols, and Lily, representing the next generation of the criminal enterprise. Each interaction provided crucial intelligence for Eleanor's ultimate objective, dismantling the organization that had killed her husband. And each demonstration of her value moved her closer to the center of their operation, exactly where she needed to be when the time came to execute her carefully planned retribution. Phase 4 was proceeding successfully. The widow was no longer just infiltrating. She was becoming integral. Evening descended over the Blackwater compound as Eleanor was escorted back to the main lodge. The day's inspection tour had provided invaluable intelligence about the organization's scale, personnel, and operations, far more than she had been able to gather during her year of external investigation. Mason had arranged for her to meet with the full Blackwater Leadership Council after dinner to discuss her security footage of federal surveillance near her property. This manufactured evidence would serve as her entry point into their inner circle, while allowing her to gather intelligence on their upcoming operation, the one Lily had inadvertently referenced at the technical facility. In her assigned room, now upgraded from prisoner accommodations to guest quarters, Eleanor found fresh clothing and basic toiletries. The new room still featured security cameras, but the surveillance was less obvious, integrated into light fixtures and air vents rather than mounted conspicuously in corners. Eleanor showered and changed, using the noise of running water to check her specialized watch. The GPS tracker continued to transmit her location to Hayes and his team, while the emergency beacon remained ready if extraction became necessary. Not that she intended to use it. Her mission required completion from within. A knock at the door preceded Vanessa's entry. "Dinner in 15 minutes. Jackson wants you there." Her tone remained coldly professional, her suspicion evident despite Eleanor's apparent cooperation throughout the day. "I'll be ready," Eleanor replied. Vanessa lingered, studying Eleanor with analytical detachment. "You've made quite an impression on our operational team. Diane doesn't typically warm to outsiders." "Professional recognition transcends organizational boundaries," Eleanor suggested, deliberately using terminology that would resonate with someone of Vanessa's apparent background. "Perhaps," Vanessa acknowledged, "or perhaps you're remarkably skilled at presenting exactly what each person needs to see to grant you access." The assessment hit uncomfortably close to Eleanor's actual methodology. She opted for partial honesty, often the most effective cover. "In my experience, survival often depends on adaptation to immediate circumstances," she replied. Vanessa's expression shifted slightly, a hint of reluctant respect crossing her features. At least you're not denying basic tradecraft. That's refreshingly direct, if still fundamentally deceptive. Before Eleanor could respond, Vanessa continued, "During dinner, you'll meet our full leadership council. People who've kept this organization functioning for decades, despite federal interference, corporate competition, and internal challenges. They're exceptionally good at identifying threats." The warning was clear. Eleanor maintained steady eye contact. "I'm not your threat, Ms. Blackwater. If anything, my interests align with yours, understanding who killed my husband and why." "We'll see?" Vanessa moved toward the door. "One last thing, wear this." She placed a small device on the dresser. Standard protocol for non-family members attending council meetings. It monitors vital signs, stress indicators primarily, security measures. The monitoring bracelet represented both challenge and opportunity. Eleanor examined it without touching it. "Sophisticated precaution. My design," Vanessa replied with a hint of professional pride. "It's also an explosive device with a 3-meter kill radius, just to ensure focused attention during sensitive discussions." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Seems excessive for a dinner conversation." "Our family has survived this long by understanding proper security protocols," Vanessa explained unapologetically. "The device remains inactive unless your vital signs indicate extreme stress or you attempt to leave the designated meeting area without authorization." Eleanor picked up the bracelet, noting its construction with professional appreciation. Elegant design, pressure trigger combined with a biometric monitor. Vanessa watched her handling of the device with heightened interest. "You recognize the components rather quickly for a civilian." "I read widely," Eleanor replied smoothly. "One develops various interests during 5 years of rural isolation." She secured the bracelet around her wrist, fully aware that it represented a significant complication to her operational flexibility. The monitoring would require careful control of her physiological responses during the upcoming meeting, a specialized skill she had developed during her nightshade training. Vanessa gestured toward the door. "After you, Mrs. Wells." They walked in silence through the lodge's expansive hallways. Eleanor mentally mapped each turn, each security feature, building her understanding of the compound's layout. The main dining room was located in the west wing, a cavernous space dominated by a massive oak table that could seat 20. Tonight it was set for 12. Jackson Blackwater sat at the head of the table, with Mason and 3 people Eleanor hadn't yet met already seated. The others from her day's tour, Diane, Hawkins, Thomas, Garrett, and Lily, entered from various doors almost simultaneously, suggesting a coordinated arrival protocol. "Mrs. Wells," Jackson greeted her with professional courtesy, "please join us." He indicated a seat halfway down the table, positioned to be observed by multiple participants. Eleanor noted the strategic placement and took the assigned seat. The monitoring bracelet on her wrist emitted a soft beep as she entered the designated area, activating its tracking functions. "Before we begin," Jackson addressed the table, "introductions for our guest. You've met most of our operational leaders today, but allow me to present our full council." He indicated an older woman with steel-grey hair and aristocratic features seated to his right, "Margaret Blackwater, my sister and our financial strategist." The woman nodded coolly, her assessing gaze remarkably similar to Jackson's, calculating, intelligent, suspicious. Beside her, Gregory Pierce, our legal counsel and regional political liaison. A well-dressed man in his 50s raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement. His manicured appearance and practiced smile suggested someone comfortable, moving between legitimate business and criminal enterprise. And finally, Dr. Catherine Reeves, medical director for our entire operation. A trim woman with practical clothing and observant eyes nodded. "Mrs. Wells." Eleanor acknowledged each introduction with appropriate deference, noting the organizational structure revealed through seating arrangements and body language. The Blackwater family occupied the highest positions, with specialized professionals forming the secondary leadership tier. Servers brought the first course, an elaborate meal that reflected the organization's substantial resources. The initial conversation remained general, touching on regional developments and property values, allowing Eleanor to observe the interpersonal dynamics of the leadership council. Margaret Blackwater clearly held significant authority, with others deferring to her assessment on financial matters. Gregory Pierce maintained connections with the local government that facilitated the organization's operations. Dr. Reeves oversaw not just medical care for Blackwater personnel, but apparently managed their pharmaceutical distribution business as well. Mrs. Wells has provided valuable intelligence today, Jackson announced as the main course was served. Information that may impact tomorrow's transportation schedule. All attention turned to Eleanor, evaluations intensifying. She noted Mason's tablet displaying what appeared to be security footage, the fabricated evidence of federal surveillance she had described earlier. Lily and Garrett were able to access Mrs. Wells' security system remotely, Mason explained. The footage confirms unusual activity along the Forest Service road parallel to her northern boundary, consistent with our own intelligence about federal monitoring. Eleanor maintained steady breathing, keeping her vital signs within normal parameters despite the heightened scrutiny. The fabricated footage, created through Hayes' technical team months earlier as part of her operational preparation, was sufficiently convincing to pass initial examination. The pattern is consistent, Thomas observed, studying the footage. Tuesday and Friday between 200 and 400 hours. Unmarked vehicles with federal registrations based on partial plate captures. What's particularly interesting, Mason continued, is the timing. These surveillance operations began approximately 2 weeks before Mrs. Wells's husband died. A significant silence settled over the table as everyone processed this implication. You believe federal agencies eliminated your husband, Mrs. Wells? Margaret asked directly, her tone suggesting skepticism. Eleanor allowed genuine grief to surface, a calculated display of controlled emotion. I believe Michael discovered something he wasn't supposed to see. Whether that was related to your operations or federal activities, I don't know. But the coincidence is difficult to ignore. Coincidences are statistical probabilities, not operational. Conclusions, Thomas countered. We need more substantive evidence before determining causality. Agreed, Jackson said. But Mrs. Wells' footage provides additional confirmation of federal interest in the eastern sector. Intelligence relevant to tomorrow's shipment. Gregory Pierce leaned forward. The question becomes whether to proceed as scheduled or implement contingency protocols. Proceeding creates unnecessary exposure, Vanessa argued, especially with confirmation of federal surveillance patterns. Delaying impacts delivery timelines, Diane countered. The Burke contract has specific penalties for schedule failures. Eleanor listened intently, gathering critical intelligence about the organization's upcoming operation, while maintaining the appearance of someone primarily concerned with her husband's death, rather than their criminal activities. What exactly happened to your husband, Mrs. Wells? Dr. Reeves asked, her clinical gaze assessing Eleanor's reaction. Official report indicated brake line failure, Eleanor replied. But the vehicle had been serviced just 2 weeks earlier, and Michael was meticulous about maintenance. The brake lines were cut, Garrett stated flatly. I examined the sheriff's photographs. Clean incision pattern, inconsistent with wear failure. This unexpected support of her position shifted the dynamic. Eleanor allowed surprise to register. In her expression, "You've seen the accident photos?" "Standard protocol," Thomas explained. We monitor all significant incidents in our operational territory. Mr. Wells' accident occurred near enough to our transportation route to warrant a security assessment. Another calculated opportunity. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. Did your assessment determine who was responsible? Jackson exchanged glances with Mason before responding. Our investigation was inconclusive. The technique used was professional, not typical criminal methodology. Meaning? Eleanor pressed. Meaning, Margaret interjected, that whoever eliminated your husband had specialized training, the kind associated with official agencies rather than criminal competitors. The implication aligned with Eleanor's fabricated narrative, federal responsibility rather than Blackwater involvement. She allowed this misdirection to advance, knowing it served her infiltration strategy. Which brings us to our current situation, Jackson said. Federal surveillance of the eastern sector has intensified precisely when our largest shipment of the quarter is scheduled. Mrs. Wells's property sits at the critical juncture of our primary and alternate transportation routes. And her security footage confirms what our intelligence has suggested, focused monitoring of those exact routes. The true nature of the meeting was becoming clear. The Blackwaters hadn't invited Eleanor merely to evaluate her information. They were considering incorporating her into their operational planning. Tomorrow's shipment can't be delayed, Mason stated firmly. The Burke contract is worth 8 figures, with downstream implications for 3 separate distribution networks. Using standard routes under confirmed surveillance is operationally unsound, Vanessa countered. What if we use Mrs. Wells's property, Diane suggested suddenly, turning to Eleanor. The federal monitoring she's documented focuses on the Forest Service Road, not her private land. Her northwestern access point connects directly to the mountain pass without crossing monitored sectors. The proposal created immediate tension. Around the table, Eleanor recognized the critical moment. Her response would determine whether the Blackwaters viewed her as a potential asset or merely a temporary information source. You want to move your shipment through my property? She asked, careful to inject appropriate hesitation rather than immediate rejection. It would resolve several logistical challenges, Jackson acknowledged, and potentially provide mutual benefit. You want information about your husband's death. We want successful completion of our transportation contract. Perhaps these objectives can be aligned. Eleanor feigned consideration, though she had anticipated and prepared for precisely this development. What exactly would be involved? Temporary access permission, Mason explained. 6 hours maximum during the early morning. Our teams handle all logistics. Your only requirement would be to disable your security system during the specified window, and in exchange, Eleanor asked, $200,000, Margaret stated flatly, plus our continued investigation into your husband's death with full disclosure of findings. The offer was substantial, designed to be difficult for a widow of modest means to refuse. Eleanor maintained her calculated hesitation. What are you transporting? She asked. Primarily pharmaceutical products, Dr. Reeves answered smoothly. Specialty medications with significant tax and regulatory burdens. Nothing dangerous or particularly illegal, just economically restricted. A practiced deception. Eleanor knew, from her intelligence gathering, that tomorrow's shipment likely contained weapons components and specialized electronics. Far more serious contraband than the medical supplies Reeves suggested. This seems sudden, Eleanor said, projecting appropriate uncertainty. Yesterday I was your hostage. Today you're offering me money to assist your operation. Circumstances evolve, Jackson replied, echoing her earlier words to Vanessa. Your security footage provides valuable intelligence. Your property offers strategic advantage, and your interests regarding your husband's death align with our own investigation of federal overreach in this region. Eleanor noted the monitoring bracelet. On her wrist, her physiological responses would be tracked during this critical decision point. She maintained steady breathing, controlling her heart rate through nightshade techniques while presenting the external appearance of someone wrestling with a difficult moral choice. "If I agree," she said carefully, "I want more than money and vague promises of information. I want active involvement in your investigation of Michael's death, full access to whatever you discover." The request was calculated to demonstrate her priority, justice for her husband rather than financial gain, while establishing a reason for continued access to Blackwater intelligence. Jackson studied her with renewed interest. "That would require a more substantive relationship than a single transaction, Mrs. Wells." "I'm aware of that," Eleanor replied, meeting his gaze directly. Mason leaned forward. "You understand what you're suggesting? Involvement with our organization isn't a casual arrangement. I understand that whoever killed my husband had professional training and resources," Eleanor said, allowing controlled intensity to enter her voice. "The kind I'm unlikely to counter through conventional channels. If your organization has the capability to identify them and the will to help me find justice, then perhaps we do have aligned interests." Jackson exchanged meaningful glances with Margaret and Mason, the core family leadership coming to a tacit agreement. "Very well," he said finally. "We accept your terms. You'll provide access through your property for tomorrow's transportation operation. In exchange, you receive financial compensation and provisional involvement in our investigation of your husband's death." Eleanor nodded slowly, as if reluctantly accepting the arrangement. "I'll need to return to my property tonight to disable the security systems and prepare for your teams." "Not possible," Vanessa stated flatly. "Security protocols prohibit releasing you before the operation's completion." "My security system requires direct interface for override," Eleanor countered. "Remote access won't disable the backup protocols Michael installed." A calculated technical detail that created an operational need for her return to the property, where she had prepared the next phase of her own mission. Thomas turned to Garrett. "Can you bypass her system remotely?" Garrett frowned. "Without specific architecture details. Remote override is uncertain. Physical interface is more reliable." "I'll accompany Mrs. Wells," Diane offered unexpectedly. "With Hawkins and a security team, we can ensure operational integrity while she manages the technical override." Jackson considered the proposal acceptable with appropriate precautions. Mrs. Wells retains the monitoring bracelet during the excursion. Any deviation from established protocols results in immediate response. The threat was clear, but Eleanor had achieved her objective. Managed to return to her property while maintaining her cover as a reluctant but pragmatic ally. "I understand," she acknowledged. "Then we agreed," Jackson concluded. "Diane will coordinate the logistics. You'll return to your property tonight, prepare the access route, then rejoin us here tomorrow to monitor the operation's completion." As dinner concluded, Eleanor noted the subtle shift in how the Blackwater leadership regarded her. Still cautious, still evaluating, but now viewing her as a provisional asset rather than merely a security concern. Mason approached as they left. "The dining room. We'll depart for your property in 1 hour. Prepare whatever you need." After he left, Eleanor returned to her room, ostensibly to gather her thoughts before the excursion. In reality, she needed to prepare for the next critical phase of her operation. The Blackwaters had taken the bait, incorporating her into their transportation operation exactly as her analysis had predicted. They believed they were using her property and cooperation for their purposes, unaware that she had deliberately maneuvered them into this precise arrangement. Tonight, she would return to her ranch, where she had spent months preparing specialized equipment and tactical advantages that would become crucial in the final phases of her plan. The monitoring bracelet complicated matters, but wasn't insurmountable for someone with her training. Eleanor checked her watch, confirming the encrypted transmission was still functional. Hayes and his team would be monitoring, ready to implement their portion of the operation when the time came, not to extract her, but to provide external pressure that would drive the Blackwaters into her carefully prepared trap. The widow's hunt was accelerating. The Blackwater organization had taken her hostage, believing they controlled the situation. In reality, they had invited the architect of their destruction into the heart of their operation, giving her precisely the access she needed to execute her meticulously planned retribution. Phase 5 was complete. The threat was escalating, not against Eleanor but against the criminals who had murdered her husband and were about to discover the lethal consequence of their fatal miscalculation. The convoy slowed as it approached Eleanor's property, headlights cutting through the midnight darkness. Diane sat beside her in the lead vehicle, while Hawkins drove, and 2 additional security personnel maintained vigilant watch from the back seat. 2 more vehicles followed, carrying Mason, Lily, and additional Blackwater operatives. "Standard procedure," Diane explained, noting Eleanor's observation of their substantial security presence. "High-value operations require appropriate force distribution." The monitoring bracelet remained secured to Eleanor's wrist, its gentle pulse a constant reminder of the Blackwaters' mistrust, despite their apparent cooperation. Vanessa had made the lethal consequences of attempted removal explicitly clear before their departure. Eleanor directed them to approach via her eastern access road, a calculated choice that would bypass the surveillance systems Hayes had strategically positioned around the property. The Blackwaters believed they were conducting security protocols. In reality, Eleanor was guiding them precisely where she wanted them. "Home sweet home," she commented as they pulled up to her darkened ranch house. "Maintain proximity protocols," Diane instructed the security team through her radio. "Full perimeter sweep before property access." Eleanor watched with professional appreciation as the Blackwater security team executed a textbook tactical assessment of her property, thorough, efficient, coordinated. They were indeed professionals, which made what she had planned all the more satisfying. "Clear," came the report after 15 minutes of methodical scanning. "No surveillance detected beyond standard property security." Diane nodded to Eleanor. "Now you can show us your security system and the access route we'll use tomorrow." "Of course," Eleanor agreed, leading them toward the ranch house. "The main control panel is in my office." Inside, Eleanor moved with practiced familiarity through the darkened house, leading them to her home office where the property's security system was centralized. Lily examined the equipment with professional interest. "Impressive setup for a civilian property," she noted, studying the monitors and control panel. "Military-grade components with civilian interface." "Michael was thorough," Eleanor explained, allowing genuine affection to color her voice. "He believed in doing things properly." She entered a complex series of commands into the system, appearing to disable the security protocols, while actually activating a specialized subroutine she had prepared months earlier. The monitors displayed deactivation confirmations, masking the silent alert now transmitting to Hayes and his team. "Systems disarmed," she announced. "The northwest access road is here." She indicated a location on the property map displayed on one of the monitors. "It connects directly to the mountain pass, bypassing the Forest Service roads, where I documented the federal surveillance." Mason studied the route with tactical assessment. "Terrain specifications, weight tolerance for loaded vehicles, improved. Gravel surface with reinforced culverts," Eleanor replied, demonstrating appropriate knowledge of her property's infrastructure. "Michael upgraded it for agricultural equipment access. It can handle commercial transport without issues." As they discussed logistical details, Eleanor noticed Diane examining family photographs displayed on her desk. Carefully curated images of her life with Michael, their fabricated history together. "You seem like you were happy," Diane observed, her tone suggesting genuine rather than tactical interest. "We were," Eleanor replied softly. The emotion behind her response wasn't entirely fabricated. While Michael hadn't been her husband in reality, he had been her partner in the Nightshade program for years before they established their cover. In Redemption Valley, his death at Blackwater hands had indeed been personal. "All the more reason to ensure tomorrow's operation succeeds," Mason interjected. "Successful completion means resources for our investigation into your husband's death." Eleanor nodded, maintaining her role as the cooperating widow while covertly advancing her actual agenda. "What else do you need to see?" "The access points," Hawkins replied. "We'll need to position security teams at strategic locations." "I'll show you," Eleanor agreed. For the next hour, she guided them around the property, indicating access roads, potential security positions, and terrain features relevant to their planned operation. Each location she highlighted had been prepared months in advance with specialized equipment undetectable to standard security sweeps, surveillance devices, tactical advantages, and specific environmental modifications that would become crucial in the coming hours. "This should work," Mason concluded after completing their property assessment. "The route provides optimal coverage with minimal exposure to known surveillance sectors." "What time will your teams arrive tomorrow?" Eleanor asked, calculating timing against her own operational timeline. 300 hours, Diane answered. Pre-dawn movement offers optimal visual coverage while maintaining darkness advantages. Eleanor nodded. "I'll need to return briefly in the morning to confirm the security override maintains stability. Michael built redundancies into the system that require periodic confirmation." Mason exchanged glances with Diane, clearly evaluating this unexpected request against security protocols. "We could maintain your presence here overnight," Diane suggested cautiously. "Simplify the logistics." The proposal aligned perfectly with Eleanor's actual plan, though she pretended to consider it with appropriate hesitation. "That would be more efficient," she acknowledged. "As long as I can return to the compound after the operation is complete. I want to be involved in the investigation you promised." "Agreed," Mason confirmed. "You remain here tonight with a security team. After tomorrow's transport clears your property, you return to the compound to debrief with the full council." As the details were finalized, Eleanor maintained her outward composure while inwardly advancing her strategic assessment. Everything was aligning precisely with her planned timeline. The Blackwaters had positioned themselves exactly where she needed them, divided between the compound and her property, with their high-value shipment scheduled to move through her precisely prepared tactical environment. "I'll need to gather some personal items," she informed them, indicating her bedroom. "If that's permitted." Diane nodded to a female security operative who accompanied Eleanor to her bedroom, maintaining visual contact while allowing minimal privacy. Eleanor collected clothing and toiletries with practiced normalcy, her movements revealing nothing of her operational preparations. The monitoring bracelet remained a complication, but not an insurmountable one for someone with her specialized training. As the Blackwater team established security positions around her property, Mason prepared to return to the compound with half the personnel, leaving Diane, Hawkins, Lily, and a reduced security team to maintain oversight of Eleanor and the planned transportation route. "We'll maintain regular communication protocols," Mason instructed Diane before departing. "Any anomalies report immediately." "Understood," Diane affirmed. "Standard security procedures remain in effect." After Mason and his team departed, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Diane maintained professional vigilance, but the operational intensity decreased marginally with the reduced personal presence. "Should get some rest, Mrs. Wells," she suggested. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Eleanor nodded, recognizing the opportunity to implement the next phase of her plan. "You're right. It certainly will be." In her bedroom, under the watchful eye of surveillance cameras the Blackwater team had installed upon arrival, Eleanor prepared for sleep with deliberate normalcy. She knew every movement was being monitored, every action evaluated for potential security threats. The monitoring bracelet continued its steady pulse against her wrist as she lay in bed, apparently settling into sleep while actually implementing specialized nightshade techniques to manage her physiological responses. The bracelet monitored heart rate, blood pressure, and stress indicators, all of which Eleanor could control with sufficient precision to mask her actual activities. After 30 minutes of demonstrating normal sleep patterns, she initiated the next phase. Using micro-movements undetectable to standard surveillance, she accessed a concealed compartment in her mattress, retrieving a specialized device she had prepared months earlier. With methodical precision, she activated the device while maintaining the appearance of normal sleep positioning. Throughout the house and surrounding property, strategically placed receivers picked up the signal, activating pre-programmed sequences. In the equipment she had installed during her year of preparation, nothing visibly changed. No lights, no sounds, no observable indications that highly sophisticated technology had just been activated. But the electromagnetic environment throughout the property had been fundamentally altered. The monitoring bracelet's pulse hesitated momentarily, just long enough for Eleanor to implement the specialized biocontrol techniques that would fool its sensors into registering continued normal functions while she cautiously rose from the bed. The device she had activated created a localized field that interfered with specific transmission frequencies while leaving others untouched. Sophisticated technology derived from nightshade research. Moving with the practice silence developed. Through years of covert operations, Eleanor crossed to her closet, accessing another hidden compartment containing specialized equipment prepared for precisely this moment. The Blackwater surveillance cameras continued to show her sleeping peacefully, the feed now running on a seamless loop from her earlier genuine sleep patterns, another capability of her activated countermeasures. Eleanor changed into tactical clothing, equipped herself with specialized tools, and moved silently to the adjacent bathroom, the one area where Blackwater surveillance had been minimized out of basic privacy considerations. There, she activated the final component of her communication system. "Hayes, confirm reception," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. The response came through the nearly microscopic earpiece she had retrieved from its hiding place. "Confirmed. Teams in position. Federal tactical units on standby at designated coordinates." "Timeline proceeds as planned," Eleanor directed. "Blackwater transport will arrive at 0300 hours. Maintain surveillance only until my signal." "Understood," Hayes acknowledged. "Extraction team ready on your command." "Snow extraction," Eleanor corrected firmly. "This concludes on my terms." She disconnected before Hayes could object, knowing her former handler would follow established protocols despite his reservations. Their arrangement had been clear from the beginning. He would provide technical support and coordinate federal resources, but the operation itself belonged to Eleanor. Her vendetta, her execution. She moved silently through the house, navigating around the Blackwater security personnel with the practiced stealth of someone trained to operate in hostile territory. Diane had established a rotating watch schedule, 2 operatives monitoring the surveillance feeds while others maintained perimeter security. Eleanor located Lily in her home office, examining the security system with professional curiosity. The young technical specialist was alone. "A critical opportunity. Impressive system," Eleanor commented softly as she entered, watching Lily spin around in surprise. "Especially the backdoor protocols most people wouldn't notice." Lily reached for her weapon, but Eleanor was faster, her movement a blur of practiced efficiency. Before Lily could activate her communication device, Eleanor had immobilized her with a precise nerve strike, painful but non-lethal. "I have no intention of harming you," Eleanor informed her calmly, "unless you force that necessity." Lily's eyes widened with understanding. "You're not just a widow." "No," Eleanor agreed, "though your organization did make me one." Understanding dawned in Lily's expression. Nightshade operative. Eleanor smiled slightly, the professional recognition of one technical specialist for another. "Your father suspected as much, Jackson too, but they underestimated the implications." "What do you want?" Lily asked, her voice steady despite her compromised position. "Information," Eleanor replied. "Specifically, confirmation of who ordered my husband's execution 1 year ago today." Lily's expression revealed she hadn't made that chronological connection. "I don't have that information, but you can access it," Eleanor countered. "Your organization maintains comprehensive records of all operations. Thomas referenced them specifically, October 17th last year, who gave the order and who executed it." The young technical specialist hesitated, clearly calculating her options. Eleanor applied slightly more pressure to the nerve point, eliciting a gasp of pain. "I don't want to hurt you," she said quietly, "but Michael deserves justice, and I intend to deliver it." "The system requires verification codes," Lily admitted. "I can't access it remotely." "Show me," Eleanor directed, allowing Lily to turn toward the computer terminal. Under Eleanor's vigilant supervision, Lily accessed the Blackwater operational database through Eleanor's own system, a connection Eleanor had anticipated and prepared for, installing specialized monitoring software months earlier. October 17th, Lily entered the parameters. Operational, directive regarding Michael Wells. The database retrieved the information with clinical efficiency. Eleanor read the operational order with cold precision, finally seeing the confirmation she had sought for a year. The directive had come from Jackson Blackwater himself, citing security concerns after Michael documented unusual activities near the northern transportation route. The execution had been carried out by Caleb and Joshua Porter, using specialized techniques to make it appear as an accident. "Thank you," Eleanor said sincerely. "That's all I needed." "What happens now?" Lily asked, her training asserting itself despite her compromised position. "Now," Eleanor replied calmly, "I implement justice." With precise application of pressure to specific neural pathways, she rendered Lily unconscious, a temporary state that would ensure the young woman remained safe during what was to come. Eleanor moved systematically through her house, neutralizing the Blackwater security personnel one by one with the specialized techniques that had made her legendary in the Nightshade program. Non-lethal approaches where possible, lethal force where necessary. Each operative was disabled before they could alert others, their communications equipment disabled with practiced efficiency. Diane and Hawkins presented greater challenges. Both possessed training that made them more formidable opponents. Eleanor located them in her living room, examining property maps while discussing security positioning for the upcoming transport operation. "Something's wrong," Diane noted suddenly, checking her communication device. "Team 2 isn't responding to status checks." Eleanor stepped into the doorway. "Because Team 2 is no longer operational." Both veteran operators reacted with impressive speed, reaching for weapons while moving into defensive positions. But Eleanor had planned this confrontation meticulously, using her intimate knowledge of the environment to maximum advantage. The specialized field she had activated earlier interfered with the electronic firing mechanisms in their weapons, a technological countermeasure developed specifically for this operation. Their firearms failed to discharge, creating momentary confusion that Eleanor exploited with ruthless efficiency. The confrontation was brief but intense, 3 highly trained professionals engaged in close-quarter combat. Eleanor sustained minor injuries but prevailed through superior preparation and environmental advantage. Within minutes, both Diane and Hawkins were incapacitated. "Why?" Diane gasped, struggling against the specialized restraints Eleanor had applied. "We offered you a partnership. You killed my husband," Eleanor replied simply. "There is no partnership that supersedes that." With the property secured, Eleanor activated the next phase of her operation. The specialized equipment she had installed throughout her ranch connected to the Blackwater communication network, transmitting fabricated security clearances that appeared to come from authorized personnel. "Phase 2 implementation confirmed," she reported into her communication device. "Prepare for transport arrival." Hayes's acknowledgement was followed by confirmation that federal tactical teams had established positions along the perimeter of Eleanor's property, not interfering, but ready to provide containment once her operation concluded. At precisely 0245 hours, Eleanor's surveillance system detected the approaching Blackwater transport convoy, 5 vehicles moving with tactical discipline toward her northwestern access point. The transport Mason had arranged, carrying whatever high-value shipment had warranted their elaborate security measures. Eleanor allowed them to enter her property, monitoring their progress through her security system. She had disabled the monitoring bracelet using the specialized field generator, removing it from her wrist and placing it strategically in her kitchen, where it would register her supposed presence during the operation. The transport vehicles followed the designated route, moving deeper into her property toward the mountain pass access point. When they reached the precisely calculated position, Eleanor activated the final phase of her plan. Specialized devices planted along the transport route disabled the vehicle's electronic systems simultaneously, a cascading failure that immobilized the entire convoy within a predetermined containment zone. Before the Blackwater operatives could implement countermeasures, Eleanor's secondary systems activated, filling the area with a specialized incapacitating agent delivered through concealed atmospheric processes. Within minutes, the entire transport team was unconscious, alive but completely neutralized. Eleanor moved efficiently through the disabled convoy, securing personnel and confirming the contents of their shipment, advanced weapons components, and specialized surveillance equipment, precisely as her intelligence had indicated. With the transport team secured, she implemented the final communication phase of her operation. "Hayes, move to Phase 3, she directed, "and patch me through to the Blackwater compound." The specialized communication system she had integrated into her property security connected directly to the Blackwater Command Center, bypassing their security protocols through exploits Lily had unknowingly revealed during her examination of Eleanor's system. Jackson, Blackwater's face, appeared on her monitor, his expression transitioning from confusion to calculation as he recognized her. "Mrs. Wells," he acknowledged, professional even in crisis. "I assume our transport team is compromised." "Completely," Eleanor confirmed, "as is your security team at my property." Mason appeared behind his father, his expression hardening. "Whatever you're planning, there are consequences you haven't calculated." "I've calculated everything," Eleanor countered calmly, "including the federal tactical teams currently surrounding your compound, the specialized evidence packages being delivered to 17 different law enforcement agencies, and the complete operational history of the Blackwater organization I've accessed through your own systems." Jackson's expression revealed his reassessment of the situation and of Eleanor herself. "Nightshade," he said finally. "Not just any operative, you're the widow." Eleanor smiled slightly at the codename she hadn't heard spoken aloud in years. "I was surprised you recognized the operational signatures. Few people outside the program would make that connection." "I had connections to the original project development," Jackson acknowledged. before it was compartmentalized beyond my clearance level. Which makes what happened to Michael even more unfortunate, Eleanor noted coldly. You should have recognized the implications of targeting a Nightshade operative's partner. Business necessity, Jackson replied without apology. Your husband discovered our primary transportation route. Security protocols required response, and now my protocols require response, Eleanor countered. 1 year ago today, you ordered my husband's murder. Today, the Blackwater organization ceases to exist. She activated the final phase of her operation, transmitting the comprehensive intelligence she had gathered directly to federal agencies while simultaneously triggering the specialized countermeasures she had prepared at the Blackwater compound through exploits in their own security systems. On her monitor, she watched as the Blackwater leadership reacted to the cascade of system failures throughout their facility. Communications disrupted, security protocols overridden, escape routes compromised. The organization that had operated with impunity for decades found itself systematically dismantled by the widow they had created. Federal tactical teams will take you into custody, Eleanor informed them clinically. The evidence packages include comprehensive documentation of every criminal enterprise your organization has conducted over the past decade, including the murder of my husband. Jackson studied her with professional recognition despite his compromised position. Impressive operation, single-source infiltration, resulting in complete organizational compromise. Nightshade methodology at its finest. Justice at its finest, Eleanor corrected. For Michael and everyone else your organization has harmed. As federal teams moved to secure the Blackwater compound and transport convoy, Eleanor completed her final preparations. Her mission, the vendetta she had planned meticulously for a full year, was reaching its conclusion. Hayes approached as she watched the Blackwater leadership being taken into custody through her security feeds. Exceptional work, he acknowledged. The director wants to discuss reactivation of your operational status. Eleanor shook her head. My work is complete. Nightshade protocols fulfilled. And what now? Hayes asked, knowing better than to press the issue. Eleanor watched as the federal teams secured the final elements of the criminal enterprise that had killed her husband. Now justice is served. The rest is an epilogue. As dawn broke over Redemption Valley, the Blackwater organization that had operated with impunity for decades ceased to exist, systematically dismantled by the widow they had created through their own fatal miscalculation. The Outlaws had taken a widow hostage, never realizing she had planned their deaths from the moment they had created her. Justice, delivered with the methodical precision that had made her legendary. Eleanor Wells, the operative once codenamed the Widow, had completed her final mission. Her husband was avenged, her purpose fulfilled. What came next would be written on a clean page, the past finally laid to rest alongside the criminal enterprise that had taken everything from her. Justice, served cold and meticulously planned, exactly 1 year from the day it had become necessary. Up next, you got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.